Every human being carries two mothers. The first is the woman you know, the one you can picture, the one with a face, a history, a voice you remember. She is real. She is flawed. She is human. She may be living or gone. She may be someone you love deeply, someone you resent, someone you have spent years trying to understand. But she is a person, a specific person. And whatever your relationship with her, close, distant, complicated, severed, you know who she is. The second mother is someone you have never met. She lives inside your psyche. She formed there in the earliest months and years of your life, during a period you cannot consciously remember, a period when your survival depended entirely on one person. And your mind had no capacity to understand that person as separate from the world itself. In that dependence, your psyche did something it had no choice but to do. It created an image, not a photograph, not a memory, a psychological figure, assembled from need, from fear, from the quality of presence or absence you received, from every moment of warmth and every moment of withdrawal. That figure was never an accurate portrait of the real woman. It was a child's interpretation built under conditions of total vulnerability, charged with an emotional intensity that no adult relationship will ever carry again. And then something happened that most people never learn about themselves. That figure did not fade. She did not dissolve as you grew older, as your mind matured, as you became capable of seeing the real woman more clearly. She remained. She settled into the architecture of your inner life, not as a memory you could revisit, but as a presence you could not detect, a silent authority, governing your sense of what you deserve, shaping how you speak to yourself after a failure, determining what you allow yourself to feel and what you shut down before it reaches the surface. Writing the rules of your inner world with a permanence that nothing in your adult life has been able to override. Her voice does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a label. It sounds to you exactly like your own thinking, your own judgment, your own honest assessment of who you are and what you are worth. That is her deepest achievement. And it is precisely why most people who carry her never discover she is there. They live their entire lives obeying an authority they cannot see, mistaking her conclusions for their own. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the force behind this figure. He called it the mother complex, a living, autonomous structure inside the psyche, operating with its own logic, its own emotional charge, its own agenda, not a diagnosis, not a label. A precise description of something that functions inside a person the way gravity functions inside a building. You cannot see it, but everything that moves according to its pull. This is not a conversation about blame. It is not about whether your mother was good or bad, loving or neglectful, present or absent. It is about something far more specific and far more consequential. It is about a figure that formed inside you before you had any say in the matter. A figure that has been quietly governing your choices, your relationships, your capacity for joy, and in your relationship with yourself ever since. And in the next few minutes, we are going to trace exactly how she was formed, what she learned to say, what she has been doing with it, and what begins to change when you finally see her clearly. To understand where this figure came from, you have to understand something about what was waiting for her before she ever arrived.
Jung recognized that the mother is not just a person. She is one of the oldest patterns in the human psyche, an archetype, buried in a layer of the mind that belongs not just to you, but to every human being who has ever lived. And this pattern carries two faces, one that nurtures, protects, gives life, and another that devours, controls, refuses to let go. Every culture across history has given those two faces names. The goddess who feeds the earth and the goddess who swallows it. The arms that hold and the arms that crush. Both faces are real. Both belong to the same force. Every child enters the world already carrying this pattern, already primed to encounter the mother as something far larger than a single woman. And so the real woman, your actual mother, becomes something she never chose to be. She becomes a screen, a surface onto which this enormous archetypal force is projected. That is why the wound, when it forms, feels so much larger than any single event could justify. You are not only carrying the weight of a personal experience, you are carrying the weight of something ancient, something that attached itself to that experience and made it mythic. When the early experience was consistent enough, warm enough, present enough, this archetype integrates in balance. The child absorbs a sense of safety, of worth, of belonging in the world simply by existing. And that foundation can hold for a lifetime. But when the experience is marked by absence, by inconsistency, by criticism, by a love that appears and disappears according to conditions the child could never fully understand, the archetype distorts. The image that forms inside the child is no longer balanced. It becomes wounded, charged, and it doesn't stay outside. It moves inward, takes root inside the psyche, and it begins to speak. And what it learns to say first is something a psychoanalyst named Ronald Fairbairn identified with almost devastating precision. He noticed that children who grow up in homes where love is unreliable almost always arrive at the same conclusion, and they arrive at it completely below conscious thought. The conclusion is this: the problem is not the parent. The problem is me. I am too much. I am not enough. If I change, if I become better, quieter, less needy, more useful, then the love will come. And this is not a rational decision. It's a survival adaptation. Because for a child who depends entirely on one person for everything, believing that person is unreliable is psychologically unbearable. It means the world itself is unsafe, and there is nothing to be done. But believing that you are the flaw, that carries a strange, painful kind of hope. It means you have some control. It means if you can just fix yourself, the love will arrive. That hope is a trap. But it's the trap that keeps the child alive. And it becomes the first sentence the inner mother ever learns to speak. You are the problem. You are not enough. Try harder. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm added something to this that cuts even deeper. He argued that motherly love, by its nature, is supposed to be unconditional. The child is not supposed to earn it. It's supposed to arrive simply because the child exists. And if that foundation was never laid, if the love was conditional, performance-based, withdrawn as punishment, or simply absent, then there is nothing the child can do to manufacture it. Every other wound in adult life offers some possibility of repair through effort. You can work harder, learn more, try again. This wound does not offer that. And so the inner mother absorbs that absence and turns it into a program that can run for decades. You must earn your right to be here. You must perform your worth. You are not acceptable as you are. This is how she was built. Not in a single moment, not through one event, but through the slow, daily accumulation of what was given and what was withheld, filtered through a mind too young to question any of it, and slowly crystallized into a figure that settles deep into the architecture of the psyche. She learned her vocabulary. She learned her logic. She learned what to say and when to say it. And then she went to work.
If this is already starting to make sense to you, then subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The first thing she took over was the way you treat yourself. Notice how you speak to yourself after you fall short of something. Notice the tone, the speed of the judgment, the absence of patience. You would never speak to someone you loved the way you speak to yourself inside your own mind. You would never hold a friend to the standards you hold yourself to, or dismiss their pain the way you dismiss your own, or demand that they keep performing when they are clearly exhausted. But you do this to yourself without hesitation. Daily, automatically, as though it were simply how a responsible person operates. It is not. It is the inner mother administering from within exactly what the original wound administered from without. The criticism, the conditions, the withdrawal of warmth when the performance drops. She does not need the real woman present to do this. She was installed. She runs the program from inside, and she runs it constantly. And she has convinced you that her voice is your discipline, your standards, your conscience. It is none of those things. It is an old wound, speaking in the only language it was ever taught. But she does not stop at how you treat yourself. She also chooses who you love. Look at the pattern, not any single relationship, but the shape that repeats across all of them. The person who is warm and then suddenly withdraws. The person whose approval you can almost reach but never quite hold. The person who makes you feel in ways too subtle to confront directly that you are close to being enough but never fully there. This pattern is not coincidence. It is not poor judgment. It is the inner mother selecting, with a precision that your conscious mind has never matched, partners who recreate the emotional climate she knows. Because the nervous system does not scan for what is good, it scans for what is familiar. And familiar for someone who grew up in conditional love is a room where warmth has to be earned, where closeness comes with a slight edge of uncertainty, where love is something that might be taken away at any moment if you stop performing. When genuine, stable, uncomplicated warmth appears, the kind that does not require you to earn it, something inside recoils. It feels foreign, suspicious, wrong. And the inner mother, who has never encountered unconditional presence and does not recognize it, quietly steers you away from it. I'm back toward what she knows, back toward the wound, calling it home. And there is something she governs that goes even deeper than relationships. She governs your capacity for joy itself. When the real mother suffered, from depression, from disappointment, from wounds of her own that she never healed, the child's psyche did something that most people will live their entire lives without discovering. It formed an identification with that suffering. It merged love with shared pain. And somewhere in the deepest emotional logic of the psyche, a vow was made. Not in words, not in conscious thought. In the wordless language of a child who understood, without being told, that the only way to stay close to the person they needed most was to remain inside her pain. I will not be happier than you. I will not surpass what you were able to become. I will not allow myself what you were never able to have, because to do so would be to leave you behind. And leaving you behind is the one thing I cannot survive. This vow runs silently beneath everything, and it activates with devastating precision at exactly the moments when genuine happiness, real success, actual freedom moves within reach. The relationship that was finally working, sabotaged. The opportunity that was about to open, missed or undermined or abandoned at the last moment for reasons that never quite make sense afterward. The joy that was arriving cleanly without conditions, met with a sudden, inexplicable guilt, as though happiness itself were a form of betrayal. This is not self-destruction. This is loyalty, devotion to a contract that was never signed, enforced by a figure that was never met, honoring a suffering that was never yours to carry. And it will continue operating, silently, precisely, without interruption, for as long as the vow remains invisible. But the truth that dissolves it is equally precise. Your suffering does not honor her. Your smallness does not protect her. Your refusal to live fully does not repair what she went through. It simply continues it. The only genuine dishonor is to take the life she gave you and diminish it in the name of a loyalty she never asked for. And there is one final domain where the inner mother operates, one that most people never think to look, the body. The wound does not live only in the mind, it lives in the muscles, in the posture, in the breath. The child whose early experience of being held, of being soothed, of being fed and comforted was inconsistent or conditional, learned something in the body long before it could learn it in language. It learned that its physical needs were excessive, that its existence required apology. And that comfort was something to be rationed, not trusted. This knowledge did not arrive as a thought. It arrived as tension, as a bracing in the chest, as a difficulty with rest that no amount of exhaustion resolves, as a relationship with physical comfort that always carries a faint undercurrent of guilt, as though the body itself were asking for too much simply by having needs at all. The body has been speaking this truth for years. It has been saying what the inner mother will not allow the conscious mind to hear. And it will continue speaking in tension, in fatigue, in pain that lives precisely where the suppressed emotion was buried, until someone finally listens. She has been governing the way you treat yourself, the people you choose, your permission to feel joy, and the way you inhabit your own body. 4 domains, 1 figure, is operating from the same wound, speaking the same language, enforcing the same program across your entire life. Now at this point, I know you can begin to see some of the inner mother's work in your own life. This may have pointed out certain moments or decisions you've made that were unconsciously influenced by her. I might not have described everything perfectly or exactly, but if this reminded you of a life experience or event, then write this below. I can relate. But there is a reason most people who become aware of this figure still cannot free themselves from her. There is something that keeps her in power even after she has been identified. And it is the one thing almost no one examines. It is the way you hold the real woman in your mind. Most people who carry this wound fall into one of 2 positions, and both, without the person realizing it, feed the inner mother's authority directly. The first is worship. The real woman is placed beyond criticism. She is sacred, she sacrificed, she did her best. Whatever happened is reframed, softened, explained away. And healing cannot begin because the wound cannot be acknowledged. If the real mother is perfect, then the voice inside that speaks in her image must be trustworthy. It must be telling the truth. And so the inner mother borrows the authority of the shrine and continues governing unchallenged. The second is rage. The real woman is made into the source of everything wrong. Every failure, every pattern, every broken relationship is traced back to her and left there. The wound has been identified, but she has been inflated into something all-powerful. And the inner mother borrows that inflation too. If the real woman is a monster, then the figure who speaks in her voice carries the weight of a monster. Even the rage keeps her enormous. Both positions are forms of myth-making. Both keep the real woman larger than human. And the inner figure's authority inside your psyche is directly proportional to the size of the myth you are holding outside it. The shift that begins to dissolve her power is not forgiveness. Jung was precise about this. Premature forgiveness is a bypass, a performance of healing that leaves the wound untouched underneath. The rage must be felt first. The grief must be given its full weight. The wound must be met honestly without spiritual shortcuts and without rushing toward resolution. But what makes that honest reckoning possible is a single perceptual shift. Seeing the real woman as a human being, not a goddess, not a villain, a person shaped by her own history, carrying her own inner mother, passed to her by someone who carried one before that. This does not erase what happened. It does not ask you to minimize the wound. It places the wound in its full context. And when the myth is dismantled, when the real woman shrinks to human scale, the inner figure loses the borrowed authority she has been operating with your entire life. That is when something becomes possible that was never possible before. You can finally turn toward this inner figure, not to fight her, not to exile her, and for the first time, simply see her. Jung understood that what lives in the unconscious does not lose its power by being fought. It loses its power by being made conscious. The patterns you cannot see are the ones that own you. The figures you have never faced are the ones that govern you. And the inner mother has governed precisely because she has never been looked at directly. When you turn toward her, not with aggression, not with the intention to destroy, but with the willingness to understand, something shifts in the architecture of the psyche. You can ask her what you have never been able to ask before. What wound are you speaking from? What are you trying to protect me from? What did you need that was never given to you? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the beginning of a different kind of relationship with the deepest part of your own interior. Because when you ask them honestly, the figure begins to change, not to disappear. She does not vanish. The wound does not evaporate, but the grip loosens. What spoke as absolute truth, you are too much, you are not enough, stay small, do not ask for more, begins to speak as something else, as inheritance, as echo, as the voice of a wound that was never yours, carried in a language you absorbed before you had the ability to question it. And in the space that opens, the space between her voice and yours, something becomes present that was always there but could never surface while she occupied the entire interior. Your own authority, not authority borrowed from performance, from approval, from achievement. Authority that comes from knowing who is speaking inside you and choosing for the first time which voice to follow. Jung called what emerges from this process the sovereign self. Not a self that has been perfected, not a self that no longer carries the wound, a self that is no longer governed by it, a self that has stopped waiting for the real mother to finally change, for someone to arrive and provide what was missing, for permission to live without the invisible contract still dictating the terms. The sovereign self has stopped waiting, not because it gave up, because it finally understood that the one thing it had been waiting for, the presence, the care, the unconditional acknowledgement of its right to exist, could only come from one place, and that place was not outside. This is what reparenting actually means, not a technique, not a practice prescribed by a therapist, although that can help. It is what happens naturally when the inner mother's voice is no longer the only voice in the room. You begin to speak to yourself the way you always needed to be spoken to, with patience that does not have conditions attached, with acknowledgement that does not require you to perform, with a care that is not given as reward for good behavior and withdrawn as punishment. The space for this was always there. It was simply occupied. And there is one more dimension to this that most people never consider. This wound did not start with you, the mother who carried the inner figure you have been living with. She carried one of her own. An inner mother passed to her by her own mother who received it from hers. This is not genetic, it is emotional architecture. Patterns of relating, of withholding, of conditional presence, to transmitted not through blood but through the daily texture of how one human being cares for another. The chain moves through generations, and in most lineages it has never been interrupted, because no one stopped long enough to see the figure clearly. No one turned around. When you do this work, when you make this inner mother conscious, when you distinguish her voice from your own, when you begin to relate to yourself from a place of genuine knowledge rather than inherited programming, you're not only changing your own inner life, you're interrupting a transmission that may have been traveling for longer than anyone in your family can remember. The relationships you enter from this point forward will not carry the same unconscious scripts. The way you hold the people closest to you will not be shaped by the same invisible loyalties. And if there are children in your life or children who will come after you, they will not inherit the same figure in the same form. The architecture changes because you are the one in the line who finally turned to look. That is what this has been, not a lesson about a psychological concept, a meeting, an encounter with a figure who has lived inside you for as long as you have been alive, shaping what you choose, what you accept, what you believe you deserve, and what you deny yourself, all without ever being seen. She was formed before you could speak. She spoke before you could question. And she has been speaking ever since, in a voice you mistook for your own. Now you have seen her, and what has been seen cannot govern the same way it did when it was hidden. That is not a promise. That is the nature of consciousness itself. The authority she carried was borrowed from your blindness to her existence. The moment you see her clearly, the moment you can distinguish between what she says and what you actually know to be true, her grip begins to change. Not because you fought her, because you finally met her, the mother you have been waiting for, the one who sees you fully, holds you without conditions, and tells you that you are enough exactly as you are. She was never going to arrive from the outside. She is the one you become when you stop letting the inner figure speak on your behalf. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. What are the events in your life, the moments, the decisions, the patterns, that you can now honestly say were influenced by the inner mother? Tell me below. Because the first step to making the unconscious conscious is identifying the parts of your life that were shaped by it, the things you once thought were just you. but now see differently. So take a moment and tell me. And if you found this helpful, then like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to go deeper into this, if you want to understand this on a level that actually changes something, then don't stop here. Watch the next video right here at the top. I'll see you there.